The district emails started arriving sometime in the early morning. I already knew the day would try me. Retail has a tone before it has a crisis. You hear it in the clipped greetings, in the chirp of handheld scanners, in the way people say my name like a question they do not want answered. I was 36, regional flagship department manager for Lattice Row, a luxury retail chain that sold everything from designer outerwear to imported skin serums with names that sounded like minor royals. My floor carried the highest foot traffic in the city cluster and, thanks to tourists with platinum cards and locals with expensive boredom, the strongest sales. I had earned my vacation, not begged for it, earned it. I had submitted the request weeks earlier for 4 days away with my sister B, who kept telling me that if I did not stop managing everyone else, I would someday need permission to blink. The request was approved in the system, stamped green, copied to payroll, and mirrored in the staffing grid I built myself because our central office treated labor planning like an abstract painting. Then our CEO, Ronan Voss, sent his message. Effective immediately, all PTO scheduled during the week prior to the Q3 company meeting was canceled. The company needed total alignment. He congratulated stores on gross profit and added that strong numbers meant nobody should feel a need to step away. That line was so foolish it felt handmade. Gross profit was not rest. Margin was not recovery. A healthy store did not mean the people inside it had become furniture. I read it twice. Then once more for the pleasure of confirming it was exactly as arrogant as it sounded. My assistant manager, Liv, stared at me from the stockroom doorway. "You look like you are about to win a lawsuit," she said. "Not yet," I told her. "At the moment, I am still in the documentary portion." I opened our dashboard and pulled 14 months of data. My department had led the region in conversion, average transaction value, loyalty enrollment, and attachments. We carried the heaviest customer load in one of the most expensive markets in the company, which meant every staffing error cost real money. I had held that machine together through resignations, shipment delays, and one memorable holiday stretch when corporate sent us decorative display ladders instead of replacement cash drawers. If anyone had earned approved leave, and it was the person making their numbers look good enough to brag about. I packaged the data into a clean deck and took it to the regional vice president, Dane Kress, a man whose most developed skill was sounding attentive while spiritually leaving the room. He skimmed the first page, tapped the table twice, and said, "I will take a look at it. That sentence is corporate, for I hope your concern dies quietly." "It is approved leave," I said, "cancelled without operational review." "I understand." "No, you understand vocabulary. I need you to understand labor risk, revenue concentration, and precedent." His smile tightened. "We all have to make sacrifices before Q3. There it was. The little sermon people give when they want your compliance to sound noble. I left his office with my deck still warm from his hands and a strange calm settling over me. Anger can be messy. Clarity is elegant. By lunchtime, I was not thinking about a vacation anymore. I was thinking about governance, policy, documentation. The things companies preach in training modules and forget in hallways. I had spent years watching executives behave as if approval systems, labor rules, bonus formulas, and reporting lines were props. But paper trails are patient. So are women who know how money moves. That afternoon, I forwarded myself every PTO approval, labor report, and performance summary connected to my team, all through proper channels, all from records I was authorized to access. Then I opened a private notebook and wrote one sentence across the first page. "This will be the last vacation anyone takes from me." Once I stopped waiting for fairness, I became excellent company. I did not storm the office. I did not cry in the parking garage. I did what competent women do when people mistake calm for surrender. I documented everything so thoroughly that the truth would someday arrive with exhibits. My sister B called while I was doing a floor walk sometime in the late morning. She is an estate lawyer, which means she sees human greed in its natural habitat and still manages to wear silk without wrinkling. I told her what happened. Was your leave in writing? She asked. Approved in the system and copied to payroll. Then your issue is not emotion, it is reliance. You planned around an authorized benefit. I smiled in spite of myself. B never hands me a tissue when she can hand me language. She reminded me of something that applies in families, each contracts, and corporations alike. People get reckless when they think policy only matters downward. They like rules for employees, discretion for themselves, and silence from anyone who notices the difference. That afternoon, I dug deeper. Our employee handbook described PTO as subject to business need, but also required timely notice and manager review. The cancellation email had no mention of store-specific necessity, staffing thresholds, or operational exceptions. It was sweeping, impulsive, and beautifully dumb. Then I looked at the bonus model. That was where my mood improved. Ronan had boasted about gross profit, but store leadership incentives were not built on gross profit alone. The formula leaned heavily on payroll efficiency, shrink control, and year-over-year comparable growth. My department delivered all three. More important, the company-wide Q3 presentation depended on regional managers submitting store narratives that supported executive strategy. My store was featured in 2 draft talking points already circulating among district leadership. They wanted my results on a stage while telling me I was too replaceable to leave for 4 approved days. I know hypocrisy when it wears a blazer. So I began to prepare my own meeting. Not a rebellion. A record. I assembled sales heat maps, staffing ratios, labor cost comparisons, and customer traffic patterns showing that my floor absorbed more volume per paid hour than any comparable department in the division. I added turnover data proving that last-minute policy reversals worsened retention. Then, I attached the previous quarter training memo where senior leadership praised local manager autonomy as a driver of performance. Contradiction is never fatal in business unless someone lines it up side by side. Liv watched me working after close and leaned against a display of leather totes. Are we leaving the country? She asked. No. That would be too relaxing. You are building something. I am building consequences. She laughed the way only people in retail can laugh, with fatigue and admiration holding hands. I also had a practical problem. My team depended on me, and I would not scorch them just to embarrass a man with a corner office. Revenge, to be satisfying, has to be precise. I revised schedules, cross-trained 2 associates, and outlined a clean operating plan proving the store could function during my absence because I had already planned for it before the cancellation. In business, the person with the stronger backup plan usually wins the moral argument and the financial one. By sometime in the evening, my folder was complete. I sent Dane one final email. Professional, tight. I requested confirmation that the cancellation applied despite documented staffing coverage, prior written approval, and my department performance. I copied human resources. He replied with 4 words, "We will discuss later." That was when I knew he had no answer worth hearing. People in power often think delay is a shield. It is not. Delay is a spotlight with a longer cord. Every hour gave me more time to align records, motives, and witnesses. And every document told the same story. They were feeding off my work while dismissing my value. I was done asking to be treated like an adult in a company built on my results. From then on, I was going to make them prove they deserved me. The week before, the Q3 meeting turned the store into a theater of polished nonsense. Corporate visitors drifted through in expensive shoes, praising displays they had never built and asking whether our fragrance table could feel more intentional, which is the sort of sentence a person says when they have never unloaded shipment in heels. I smiled, nodded, and kept my own counsel. Inside, I was setting the trap with the patience of a woman folding cashmere. My chance arrived during the regional prep call sometime in the early afternoon. Dane was on video. Ronan joined late from headquarters. Finance, HR, and several store leaders were patched in. The stated purpose was readiness. The real purpose was performance theater. Dane asked me to share best practices from my department since our location was leading the region. I almost thanked him for the invitation. I walked them through our numbers with complete composure. Traffic density, conversion discipline, labor deployment, high margin attachments, return containment. Then I shifted. These results are also why blanket PTO cancellation creates concentrated operational risk, I said. In high-volume departments, approved leave is not casual. It is part of workforce planning. Silence. The kind that means several people just sat up straighter. Ronan gave a thin smile. The company needs focus ahead of Q3. Of course, I said. That is why I built coverage before my leave was approved. I shared the staffing plan on screen, then the approval record, then the handbook language, then the prior executive guidance on manager discretion and retention. Every page was dated. Every citation was clean. I did not sound angry. Anger invites dismissal. Precision gets minutes taken. HR finally spoke. We may need to review how the cancellation was implemented. May. Such a timid little word. I continued as if she had said yes. There is also compensation exposure when approved benefits are reversed without consistent criteria. And if we are discussing profit, my department contribution should be evaluated against the actual incentive structure, not just headline gross profit. Finance asked me to send my model after the call. Dane looked as though he had swallowed a decorative pine cone. Ronan shifted to executive warmth, the tone men use when they sense the room drifting away from them. We appreciate your passion. Passion. Another lovely insult. Women bring evidence and get diagnosed with emotion. I appreciate policy being followed, I said. That call ended with more thank yous than it deserved, and less certainty than anyone in headquarters liked. But uncertainty was enough. The right kind of uncertainty makes cowards talk to legal. By sometime in the evening, two things happened. First, HR requested a formal summary from me. Second, a district manager I barely knew sent a private note saying 3 other stores had lost approved leave the same way, and nobody had wanted to challenge it. There it was. Not a fluke. A pattern. I thought of B, who always says people reveal themselves fastest around inheritance and hierarchy. Give someone money they did not earn or power they did not examine, and sooner or later they will confuse control with entitlement. I was not interested in being a martyr for retail dignity. I was interested in leverage, so I prepared a sharper memo. I framed it around operational consistency, retention risk, and policy governance. I included no melodrama, only facts. I referenced how abrupt reversals can push top performers out, weaken internal controls, and inflate recruitment cost in specialized markets. Replacing experienced managers is expensive. Training losses are measurable. Revenue instability has a body count, and it usually starts in payroll. Then I added one more line, crisp as a knife. If approved leave can be revoked without review, then performance planning is unreliable by design. That memo moved faster than gossip. Around closing, my PTO was quietly reinstated. Most people would call that a win. I called it Stage 1, because by then I understood something Ronan and Dane did not. I no longer wanted permission to rest. I wanted terms. When my PTO came back, Liv hugged me so hard she nearly folded my blazer collar into a legal argument. You won, she said. No, I told her. They retreated. Winning would require permanence. I still took the trip. B and I sat near the water under a pale sky, and for the first time in months I let my shoulders drop from their permanent position near my ears. But rest did something inconvenient. It made me think clearly enough to admit that reinstated leave did not solve the real problem. I was still working for people who viewed strong managers as compliant machinery. The next approval, The next compensation review, the next strategic reshuffle would bring the same arrogance wearing new shoes. So while B read case notes and insulted wealthy siblings over speakerphone in language polished enough for court, I built my exit. Not a dramatic exit, an expensive one. I updated my resume with numbers no sane recruiter would ignore. I reached out to a former vendor contact named Suri, who had moved into operations consulting for premium retail groups. By sometime in the early evening, she had connected me with a recruiter handling a role for a private retail consortium that owned a string of high-yield urban stores. They wanted someone to lead performance strategy across several flagship departments, you with authority over staffing models and manager retention. In other words, they wanted my brain without asking it to apologize first. Before I left Lattice Row, I had one final errand. The Q3 company meeting opened in a hotel ballroom full of uplighting and executive optimism. Ronan took the stage and talked about discipline, culture, and shared accountability. Three concepts that always grow louder in organizations where the top floor has stopped practicing them. Then, Dane introduced a retention initiative. My retention framework. Not by name, of course, but I recognized my language, my analysis, my recommendations dressed in corporate beige. I laughed softly into my water glass. After the session, I requested a private conversation with HR and finance. I handed them my resignation, effective under my contractual notice period, along with a memorandum documenting my authorship of the policy recommendations now being presented as regional leadership work product. I was careful. Ideas created within the scope of employment are usually not property a manager can carry off like a lamp. But attribution matters in internal promotion decisions, compensation reviews, and ethical reporting. So does retaliation. So does record integrity. I was not claiming ownership of company documents. I was claiming my contribution, my chronology, and my refusal to let two men build a ladder from my spine. HR looked stunned. Finance looked interested. There is no audience like finance when liability might be nearby. Then came the prettiest moment of all. Ronan found me in the corridor and tried charm. He said I was valuable. He said there were opportunities ahead. He said sometimes leaders make hard calls and people misread intent. No, I said. People usually read intent very well. That is why they leave. His jaw tightened. I gave him the warmest smile of my professional life. You told us gross profit meant we did not need time away. That was useful. It taught me how this company values labor. So I adjusted my asset allocation. He blinked. I let him have a second. My effort was underpriced. I moved it. Then I walked away before he could recover, which is a deeply underrated life skill. By the time the meeting ended, 3 other managers had requested policy reviews. One had already contacted the same recruiter Suri sent me. Funny how courage spreads once somebody opens a window. My revenge was never destruction. It was revaluation. And I was about to become very expensive. I started my new role sometime in the early morning of a rainy week, wearing low heels, carrying a notebook, and feeling lighter than I had in years. The consortium was called Vesper Thread. Strange name, smart people. They had their flaws, naturally. Any company with ambition eventually grows blind spots. But on my first day, the chief operating officer asked me a question nobody at Lattice Row had ever asked. What makes high performers stay? Not how do we squeeze more out of them. Not how do we standardize personality until nobody needs oxygen. Stay. I gave her the honest answer. People stay where policies match speeches, where approvals mean something, where profit is not used as a stick to beat the very hands producing it. They stay where managers are trained to document risk instead of bury it under motivational wallpaper. They stay where benefits are treated like part of compensation, because they are. Time off is not decorative. It is a promised asset with planning value. Break that promise often enough, and people stop building their future around you. She nodded and told me to put it in the operating model. So I did. Within months, we rolled out new leave safeguards, escalation paths for last-minute reversals, and performance metrics that accounted for retention quality instead of just turnover after the damage. I trained store leaders to read bonus structures the way good women read contracts, for incentives, loopholes, and the sentence nobody mentions until it matters. I taught them to keep records, challenge vague refusals, and separate loyalty from surrender. I reminded them that being agreeable is not a business strategy. EB claimed I had become annoyingly serene. She was wrong. I was delighted. The final twist arrived through Liv, who still sent me messages spicy enough to qualify as weather events. Dane had been sidelined after HR expanded its review of leave practices and attribution issues around Q3 materials. Ronan remained in his chair, but boards tend to dislike executives who create retention fires in profitable markets. Investors dislike them even more. Public confidence is delicate. Internal governance more so. A leader can survive weak sales with a story. Repeated control failures are harder to accessorize. Liv also told me my old store had struggled after I left. Not because I was magic. I distrust that kind of mythology. Stores do not collapse from one person leaving. They wobble when leadership spends too long treating competence as an infinite natural resource. That, more than anything, was what I wanted women to understand. You do not protect yourself by being indispensable to the wrong people. You protect yourself by knowing what your work is worth, what the rules actually say, who benefits when you stay quiet, and how to leave with your documentation neat enough to make liars sweat. Around sunset one evening, I took the trip I had originally planned, just later and with better luggage. I sat on a balcony with B, watching light slide across the water, and she lifted a glass to me. "To vacation?" she said. "To valuation," I corrected. Because that was the real story. A CEO canceled my approved leave and assumed the matter ended there. AVP dismissed my numbers and expected me to swallow it with a polished smile. Instead, I learned exactly how fragile power becomes when it leans too hard on a woman who understands policy, profit, and timing. They denied me a few days. I took the whole future.